Hi, it's Lauren, and today on Stitch Lessons I'm going to show you how to sew backstitch. When it's done, backstitch looks like a solid line of stitching, and it actually resembles the stitches you'd get with a sewing machine. Because of that, you can use it instead of a sewing machine if you don't have access to one, or if you'd prefer to sew a project by hand. Most often, I use backstitch in a decorative way to draw a line with embroidery floss, or even to write out words. Here's how it's done. To make stitching a straight line easier, I drew a guideline in disappearing ink. I've threaded a needle with embroidery floss, and I tied a big knot at the end to keep my stitches from coming undone. I like to start my backstitch with a regular straight stitch so I can see exactly where to go next. Push your needle up from the back of your fabric at the beginning of the line you want to draw, then back down 1 stitch length along the line. You can make your stitch lengths as long or as short as you'd like. Now's where the stitch name comes in. We're going to back into the end of our previous stitch so we can get the stitches as close together as possible and not leave any gaps between them. Push your needle up from the back of the fabric 1 stitch length away from your first stitch, using the length of that stitch as a guide for how far that should be. Then back down through the fabric from above, exactly where the first stitch ended. You can even use the same hole if you want to. Let's try that again. Push your needle up from the back 1 stitch length away from the last stitch you made, then back down right up against the end of that last stitch. Repeat that pattern for as long as you'd like until you have a lovely solid line of stitching. Now I'll show you how to take what you've learned and use it to backstitch something other than a straight line, like this cursive letter L. Again, I'm drawing the letter with disappearing ink so I have a guide to follow. I'm making my first stitch right at the start of that line. Most people seem to do this backwards like the rest of the back stitches, but like I said earlier, I prefer to do the first stitch forwards and it comes out looking the same anyway. Then repeat the same pattern we followed earlier, pushing your needle up from the back 1 stitch length away and backing into the previous stitch to make your solid line. However, it can be a little bit trickier to make a curved line, especially if you're working on a smaller scale or your line is a bit more detailed, so here are some tips to make that easier. When I'm drawing a curved line, I find that I can make the curve rounder and more subtle if I shorten my stitch lengths, so don't go as far away when you're backing into a previous stitch as you would when stitching a straight line. See how these are a bit shorter? If your stitch length is too long, your curve might look more like an octagon than a circle, for example. And unless you want to make corners or peaks, that might not come out looking the way you intended it to. Also, you can totally overlap previous lines with this stitch if your design calls for it. Just keep stitching the way you have been the whole time, and you'll sew right over it like I did here. This can be time-consuming, but I think that it comes out looking so pretty when your letter is done. You can even connect it to other letters to spell out words or phrases, change up your lettering style, and really you're only limited by your imagination once you get the hang of it. And that concludes my lesson on backstitch. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial. I hope that you make something lovely with what you learned. If you'd like to see more of the hand sewing and embroidery tutorials in this series, be sure to watch the rest of my Stitch Lessons playlist. Click the Stitch Lessons logo on the screen or check the video description for links if you're interested. Happy stitching!